Good evening from Tampa. In 1976, President Gerald R. Ford issued an executive order that read in part, quote, "No employee of the United States government shall engage in or conspire to engage in political assassination." Our fifth story on the countdown tonight, as we first reported on this news hour last night, investigative reporter Seymour Hersh claiming to have uncovered a covert executive assassination ring that reported directly to Vice President Dick Cheney's office. A reminder, if one is needed, that in 1976, Mr. Cheney was the chief of staff to President Ford, meaning by the time Cheney was back in the West Wing, it appears he had either forgotten about his own boss's executive order, or worse, he had decided to ignore it. Mr. Hersh making the revelations at a forum in Minnesota 2 nights ago. The topic, America's constitutional crisis. Hersh saying of Mr. Cheney and his inner circle, quote, "They ran a government within the government," adding 8 or 9 neoconservatives took over our country. Hersh's bombshell allegations about the assassination ring, the result of reporting for a book he says might still be a year or 2 away from being published. Hersh telling MinPost.com in an email after the event that the disclosures are, quote, "not something he wanted to dwell about in public." The toothpaste, however, already out of the proverbial tube here. When the discussion touched upon the abuses of executive power, Mr. Hersh asked how these things tend to happen and whether they continue to happen to this day. In his reply, the reporter describing a secret commando unit officially called the Joint Special Operations Command.
There's a special wing of our special operations community that is set up independently. They do not report to anybody except in the Clinton, in the Bush-Cheney days, they reported directly to the Cheney office. They do not report to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or to Mr. Gates, the Secretary of Defense. They report directly to him. They are not, they have absolutely no, Congress has no oversight of it. It's an executive assassination wing, essentially. And it's been going on and on and on. And just today in the Times, there was a story saying that its leader, a 3-star admiral named McRaven, ordered to stop the certain activities because there were so many collateral deaths. It's been going under President Bush's authority. They've been going into countries, not talking to the ambassador or to the CIA station chief, and finding people on a list and executing them and leaving. That's been going on, well, in the name of all of us.
A CIA spokesman today responding to Hersh's allegations by calling them, quote, utter nonsense. 2 angles on this at minimum. John Dean in a moment. First, we'll call in our own Howard Fineman, senior. If, as Cy Hersh alleges here, the vice president, the former vice president, and a covert assassination ring operated without talking to the CIA, how exactly would the CIA be in the position to call Mr. Hersh's reporting utter nonsense?
In checking around in the intelligence community today, I can say this. You know, Seymour Hersh is somebody they respect. They don't always trust. But they put it this way, as one of them said to me, look, I don't know anything about this specifically at all, but I wouldn't dismiss what Cy Hersh is saying without checking carefully. That's their backhanded way of saying it's worth looking into for sure.
Presumably the second half of his allegations, which was that the CIA was involved significantly in domestic operations in the last 8 years, that would be something somebody in the CIA probably could deny with some degree of credibility. But as to the other thing,
right,
just because we might not be surprised by what Mr. Hersh is alleging, I mean, people who look at Dick Cheney would say, well, yeah, that sounds plausible if it isn't actually true. Should that make this revelation any less shocking, or if true, any less egregious and essentially terrifying to the nature of the democracy?
Well, depressing is another word I would use, and infuriating if it pans out, if when Cy's book comes out it's all there, because it would be of a piece with the picture that's emerging. We became what we beheld, to use a phrase from a great movie called The Untouchables, and I think it's clear in the days right after 9/11 that especially Vice President Cheney, and he managed to convince George W. Bush, who maybe didn't need a whole lot of convincing, that secrecy and really lawlessness was the way to go in the early days. And rather than focus on catching Osama bin Laden, to use another phrase, they didn't let a good crisis go to waste. And they used the atmosphere of crisis after 9/11 for all kinds of arrogations of power, accumulating power in the executive, and really within the Vice President's office in a way that we haven't seen outside of declared wartime, and even there with more strictures than were the case here.
Could this report or report of a report, since he doesn't have anything on this yet other than his allegation, could it possibly put some muscle, some steam behind the Truth Commission that Senator Leahy is calling for, but a Truth Commission that would allow for the necessity of prosecutions? Because if this is true, you have to prosecute this. There's no way around this.
Yeah. Yeah, this would be even beyond the powers, I think, of the Commission of Inquiry that Senator Patrick Leahy is talking about.
As always, Howard, great thanks. For more on the legal questions raised by Cy Hersh's reporting, let's turn to John.
Good evening, Keith.
First and foremost, let's begin with the executive order that I quoted at the beginning from President Ford that banned U.S. involvement in political assassinations. If that is the case, wouldn't an executive assassination ring that reported directly to the Vice President's office be on the face of it illegal, and might it also be on the face of it a war crime?
Well, clearly fighting terrorism is not dealing in tiddlywinks. We want our government to deal with the most effective tools they have, but they also have to be legal. The executive order really is nothing more than direction to the executive branch, and the president's the only one who you can even argue might have the authority to engage in assassinations. It's an unresolved question, so it's potentially a war crime, it's potentially just outright murder, and it could clearly be in violation of the Ford executive order.
Last summer, writing about the Joint Special Operations Command, Cy Hersh described a Bush administration mindset that posited that the president could not keep covert CIA operations free of congressional interference or oversight, but he could do that with clandestine military activities. So they then claimed that everything secret was military, not CIA. Is there legal merit to that argument, and if so, what is it?
Well, it's a thin argument. It kind of reminded me, when I heard it, of Nixon's claim that when he was paying hush money, he was really funding a humanitarian defense fund for the Watergate burglars. I'm not sure it works. It's an argument. It is nothing more, Keith.
Does it explain, though? I mean, does that mindset explain the Bush administration's persistent devaluation of the CIA into not much more than a public relations firm that it would manipulate? I mean, all the intelligence was moved under the control of, if not necessarily the Vice President's office. When it wasn't there, it would go to Donald Rumsfeld's office at the Pentagon. They really kind of neutered the CIA.
Well, there's no question they did that. This is a very interesting potential as further explanation as to why they might do that. We've got to remember, however, the CIA has maintained a clear covert operative entity inside of its operations. So from the intelligence standpoint, I can understand why they wanted to neuter it. From an operational standpoint, I'm not quite sure, because a lot of the people they hire come from this special operations unit in the military. So I think that you know, it's an interesting argument. I'm not sure it's the full one.
The second part of the I guess it was a Hersh, essentially a slip by Cy Hersh, saying that Central Intelligence had been heavily involved in domestic spying in the Bush administration. That's clearly, we've been through this before, right? That has been clearly defined as utterly illegal.
That is, by statute, that is illegal. There's no question about that. The CIA is well aware of it. Every CIA director is pinned down on that question when he goes through a confirmation proceeding. So I don't think there's any question that's illegal, and would be quite shocking if they were engaging in the sort of things that Cy suggests.
What does this suggest to you as the remedy? Are we again at that point where the minimum standard is a truth investigation, a truth committee or commission with the prospect, at least, of prosecutions, that, in other words, not handing out immunity like it was candy?
Well, I think that's you know, this is pretty serious stuff, Keith, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think that Cy is a highly reliable reporter. He doesn't throw things out unless there's some basis in fact for this sort of thing. He's written around this subject. There's quite a bit actually out on the record already about Rumsfeld authorizing assassinations. So I think that this is something that the Congress probably should get into, and I'm not sure a truth commission would necessarily do it. So I suspect the intelligence committees, if they haven't already looked, will look.
Speaking of looking, nobody's come up with a roster of possible people to whom he was referring, the victims of this. Have we seen anything like that? Have you seen anything like that?
In some of Cy's writings, he said as many as 10 different countries had been targeted for special ops activities. and this could indeed run the gamut. So I don't know that we have a target, and maybe that's what is the bombshell in his book.
Well, we'll have to take a look back through about 7 years' worth of news. John Dean, author of Worse Than Watergate and Broken Government, as always. Thanks so much for your perspective tonight, John.
Thank you, Keith.
So, where does the moral flexibility implied by a Cheney death squad story come from? No politician could spring fully grown from the ground dreaming of secret international assassination rings, not even Dick Cheney. The answer might lie in another story tonight. It turns out that 2 weeks ago, the embattled chairman of the Republican National Committee told an interviewer he believes a woman has a right of choice between abortion and bearing a child. But he denied another choice. Homosexuality, he said, is no more a choice than is being black. And today, he had to repudiate both of those statements to insist those were not his viewpoints. So if Dick Cheney is the finish line, what's the starting point? Michael Steele selling, if not his soul, then its component parts to lead a political party with which that soul so clearly disagrees?